Hello everyone. Tonight we meet each other in that familiar moment when the day finally loosens its grip. You might be lying on your side, phone warm in your hand, or staring at a ceiling that knows all your worries by name. Outside, the world has dimmed to a manageable volume. Inside, your thoughts are still shuffling papers, tapping calculators, replaying conversations with numbers that never seem polite. You might be scared, but don't worry, everything will be all right. That's not a promise shouted from a billboard. It's more like a whisper, the kind you trust because it doesn't demand belief. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something comforting about knowing someone else is also awake, also breathing, also trying to make peace with the quiet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin tonight's journey. You settle deeper into the night and notice something small but strange. Your wallet is nearby, maybe it's on the table, maybe tucked into a bag, maybe forgotten in a pocket like an introverted friend. You're not planning to open it. You're not counting anything. You're just aware of it. And for the first time in a long while, you don't glare at it. You don't accuse it. You don't sigh dramatically as if it personally betrayed you. Instead, you lean closer, mentally, and you whisper. It feels ridiculous at first. You whisper to your wallet the way someone whispers to a sleeping cat or a stubborn houseplant. Your voice is quiet, almost embarrassed. You say something simple, like, "We're okay," or, "You've done your best," or even, "I'm not mad at you." This is where the humor sneaks in. If anyone walked in right now, they'd think you'd finally crossed into full late-night eccentric territory. The kind where people start naming their furniture. But instead of fear tightening your chest, something loosens, just a little. You notice your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, that sharp edge in your thoughts softens, as if someone turned down the contrast on an image that was too bright. Whispering, it turns out, is different from thinking. Whispering requires breath. It slows you down. It makes your words careful. And in that care, fear finds fewer places to hide. There's a true story that floats through this moment. One you might not expect. A woman in her 40s, working 2 jobs, once admitted that her biggest financial shift didn't start with a raise or a windfall. It started one night when she stopped berating her bank account. She was exhausted, sick of spreadsheets and panic. On a whim, half joking, she thanked her wallet out loud for surviving the month with her. Weeks later, nothing magical had fallen from the sky. But something crucial had changed. She stopped making fear-driven decisions. She slept better. She noticed opportunities she'd been too tense to see before. Within a year, her situation had steadily improved. Not explosively, gently, like a tide that doesn't announce itself but still moves the shore. Here's a little-known fact that rarely makes it into dramatic speeches about success. Humans respond differently to whispered speech than to internal monologue. Psychologists have observed that speaking softly can activate calming neural pathways, similar to how lullabies work on infants. It's not mystical fireworks. It's biology meeting intention. When you whisper, your body listens differently. Your nervous system hears. There is no emergency. And money fear, for all its spreadsheets and seriousness, often lives in the nervous system first. Historians still debate whether ancient prosperity rituals were about invoking external forces or simply training attention and behavior. Some argue it was belief in the divine. Others suspect it was the discipline of repetition, the quiet moments of focus that shaped decisions over time. Sitting here now, whispering to an inanimate object, you're unknowingly stepping into that debate. Are you talking to money? Or are you teaching yourself a new tone? You notice another small shift. When you whisper kindly, you don't feel the urge to immediately fix everything. You're not scrambling for solutions at midnight. You're allowing the idea that not everything must be solved right now. That's the second joke of the night. Really, your problems have been acting like toddlers demanding snacks at 3 a.m., and you've finally said, "We'll talk about this in the morning." There's humor in how dramatic fear can be. Fear treats a low balance like a moral failing. Like you personally offended the universe. Whispering punctures that drama. It's hard to panic in a whisper. Try it. Even the word, disaster, sounds like a shy suggestion when whispered. You almost laugh. And that laugh feels like relief sneaking in through a side door. You begin to sense what people mean when they talk about a gentle prosperity loop. It doesn't start with abundance raining down. It starts with a softer relationship. When fear eases, your mind becomes less reactive. When your mind is less reactive, you make choices that align with care instead of urgency. When your choices change, outcomes eventually follow. Loop, not leap. Another true account drifts in. Quieter than the first. A man recovering from burnout once shared that his financial stress eased alongside his health. He began speaking kindly about money during his evening walks, mostly to distract himself from pain. Over time, his stress-related symptoms improved. His work quality improved. Clients responded differently. Health and money, it turned out, were sharing the same tense shoulders. You lie there now, breathing, aware that nothing dramatic has happened. No cosmic trumpet has sounded. No notification has buzzed. And yet, something has shifted. Fear feels less like a monster and more like a nervous roommate you've finally acknowledged. Remember this moment. Remember how strange and simple it felt to whisper instead of worry. Remember that alligator. Remember to use sunscreen. The mind works like that, connecting odd reminders to calm states. Later, when fear returns, as it always does, this memory might surface. A whisper, a breath, a softer tone. You don't need to believe in anything grand right now. You only need to stay here, in this quieter beginning, where difficulties haven't vanished but have stopped shouting. And in that silence, you start to understand the first truth of the night. Fear loses much of its power when you stop yelling back. You're still here in the same night, the same position, the same gentle hum in the background. Nothing has reset. There's no dramatic cut. Your wallet is still nearby, quietly minding its business. After whispering to it, you notice something unexpected. The fear didn't disappear, but it lost its seriousness. It's like a stern teacher suddenly slipping on a banana peel. You can't help it. You smile. And that smile matters more than you'd think. You open your wallet now. Just a little. Not to count. Not to judge. Just to look. It's not exactly overflowing with golden light. It's more like a modest cave with a few brave coins standing guard. Instead of the usual internal lecture, "You should have done better," you hear yourself thinking, "Well, you're doing your best, little guy." That's joke number 1 for the evening. You've anthropomorphized your wallet. And somehow it feels emotionally healthier than your previous strategy. Humor does something sneaky. It lowers defenses. When you laugh at scarcity, even gently, you stop treating it like a permanent identity. You stop saying "I am broke" and start seeing this as a situation, not a personality trait. That shift is subtle but powerful. You're no longer trapped inside the problem. You're observing it, maybe even teasing it. There's a true story that fits perfectly here. A young artist once admitted that her finances were so tight she avoided opening mail. Bills felt like personal attacks. One night, exhausted and half delirious, she started making jokes about her empty wallet, narrating it like a wildlife documentary. Here we see the rare endangered dollar, surviving on crumbs. She laughed. The tension broke. Over time, that humor stopped her from freezing. She opened letters. She negotiated payments. She found commissions. Her situation didn't change because money heard the joke, but because she did. Here's a little-known fact that rarely gets mentioned in productivity advice. Humor activates the same brain regions involved in cognitive flexibility. When you laugh, your brain becomes better at seeing alternatives. Scarcity thinking is rigid. It says, there is only one outcome and it's bad. Humor says, what if that's not the whole story? Even a small chuckle can widen your mental field of view. You notice how your breathing feels different now. Earlier, fear sat heavy, like a weight on your chest. Now it's lighter, more mobile. You're not ignoring reality. You're just not dramatizing it. That's joke number 2. You realize panic has been acting like an unpaid intern, very loud. Not very helpful. Historians still debate whether cultures that incorporated humor into hardship were more resilient economically or simply better storytellers about survival. Some argue that humor was a coping mechanism, not a solution. Others believe it directly influenced communal problem solving. Sitting here, quietly amused by your own wallet, you're participating in that ancient experiment. Does laughter change outcomes? Or does it just make the waiting kinder? You think back to moments when money fear felt overwhelming. How often did it paralyze you? How often did seriousness masquerade as responsibility? You'd tell yourself, if I don't worry, I'm being irresponsible. But tonight, you're discovering something gentler. Calm attention often does more than anxious vigilance. Humor doesn't mean denial, it means perspective. Another true account drifts in. A middle-aged man once shared that during his worst financial year, he started a ritual of joking gratitude. Every night he thanked his wallet sarcastically but kindly. Thanks for keeping the lights on. Champ. Over months, his relationship with money softened. He stopped impulsive spending fueled by stress. He planned better. Eventually, his income stabilized. He always insisted the jokes didn't summon money. They summoned sanity. You feel that now. Sanity. Not excitement. Not hope fireworks. Just a grounded sense that you are still you. Regardless of numbers. And that realization is deeply relaxing. It's hard to fall asleep when your self-worth feels under audit. It's easier when you remember you're allowed to exist even with an imperfect balance. You might notice a third light joke slipping in as you imagine money eavesdropping on this conversation. Confused but relieved that you've stopped yelling. If money had ears, it would probably prefer whispers and jokes over late-night interrogations. And if it doesn't have ears, at least you do. There's another little-known observation from behavioral studies. People who emotionally distance their identity from financial outcomes recover faster from setbacks. Humor is one of the easiest ways to create that distance. You're no longer fused with the problem. You're sitting beside it, maybe nudging it playfully. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This is one of those mental callbacks. The brain loves familiar signals of safety. Humor becomes one of yours. Later, when fear creeps back, a small joke might be enough to remind your nervous system that you've been here before and survived. You don't close the wallet with dread anymore. You close it gently, like tucking something in for the night. You're not pretending everything is solved. You're just choosing not to let seriousness steal your rest. That choice, repeated, becomes a habit. That habit becomes a tone. And that tone quietly shapes tomorrow. The night continues. Nothing dramatic interrupts. And in this soft continuation, you learn a second truth. Scarcity loses much of its grip when you stop treating it like a tragedy and start treating it like a temporary, slightly awkward guest. You don't move much as the night deepens. The humor lingers, but it settles into something steadier now. Like embers instead of sparks. Your body remembers how it feels to not be braced for impact. Somewhere between the whisper and the laugh, your breathing found a rhythm that doesn't rush itself. This is usually where stories arrive, not loudly, not announced, but drifting in as if they were already waiting for you to slow down. You think about a real person, not a headline or a motivational poster, but someone ordinary, a woman you might pass in a grocery store without noticing. She once sat on her bed, just like you are now, staring at an overdue notice and feeling that familiar heat of shame rise up her neck. She had tried affirmations before, big, shiny sentences about wealth flowing freely, but they bounced off her fear like hail on a tin roof. One night, exhausted, she tried something different. She spoke quietly to the envelope itself. Not angrily, not desperately. She said, "I see you. You don't get to scare me tonight." It sounds small, almost silly, but that night, she slept. What followed wasn't a miracle in the cinematic sense. No sudden inheritance, no viral success. Instead, she noticed her days felt less frantic. She called the company instead of avoiding it. She negotiated instead of apologizing. She asked for help without collapsing into embarrassment. Over months, her debt decreased, slowly, predictably. She later said the biggest shift wasn't money, it was the absence of panic. Panic had been expensive. Calm, it turned out, was affordable. You let that story sit with you, noticing how it doesn't ask you to believe in anything extraordinary. It asks you to consider that fear might be louder than reality. That fear might be the most dramatic storyteller in the room. And tonight's title, "There is only one storyteller," starts to make more sense. When fear narrates your finances, everything sounds like a cliff edge. When calm speaks, even problems sound like paths. Here's a little-known fact that rarely gets framed this way. Chronic financial stress has been shown to reduce working memory capacity. In simpler terms, fear makes you worse at thinking. It narrows your options. It eats bandwidth. When you soften fear, even a little, you regain cognitive space. You don't become smarter overnight. You become available to your own intelligence again. That's not mysticism. That's neurology doing its quiet work. Historians still debate whether economic resilience in certain periods came from material resources or from cultural attitudes toward uncertainty. Some scholars argue that societies with rituals for calming fear, prayers, songs, shared humor, recovered more steadily from hardship. Others insist the material conditions mattered far more. Lying here now, you realize the debate might be missing something. Material conditions and mental tone are tangled together. One feeds the other in loops that are hard to separate. You feel that loop forming gently inside you. Whispering softened fear, humor loosened rigidity. Now, stories are reframing what's possible. Not fantasies, stories of people who didn't conquer money, but stopped letting it dominate their nervous systems. That shift alone changed how they moved through the world. There's a quiet joke in realizing how often you've been bullied by numbers on a screen. Numbers themselves are neutral. They don't judge. They don't sneer. They just sit there. Yet somehow, they've been narrating your self-worth like an overly dramatic audiobook. Tonight, you imagine pressing pause on that narrator. You don't delete the story. You just stop letting it shout. Another true account slips in. Almost like a footnote. A man once described how he recovered financially after illness by doing something painfully unambitious. Every evening, he reviewed his finances without commentary. No self-talk, no blame, just observation. He whispered acknowledgments instead of conclusions. This is here, that is due. Over time, he noticed his body didn't react as strongly. His health improved alongside his decision-making. Money followed health, not the other way around. You notice how sleepiness is beginning to blur the sharp edges of thought. This is important. Sleep isn't an escape from problems, it's maintenance for the mind that solves them. Fear hates sleep because sleep interrupts its monologue. That's joke number 1 for this section. Fear is the kind of storyteller who panics when you turn off the lights. There's another little known detail worth tucking away. Whispered speech often increases self-compassion. When you whisper, you tend to choose gentler words. Gentler words lead to gentler interpretations. Gentler interpretations reduce the urge to catastrophize. You're not fixing money, you're fixing the story about money. And stories are powerful precisely because they're invisible. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This is another callback your mind can store. Stories matter. Narrators matter. When fear grabs the microphone, everything sounds urgent and dire. When you take it back, even quietly, the same facts feel survivable. You don't feel triumphant, you feel settled, and that's enough. Settled is fertile ground. From here, decisions don't feel like emergencies. They feel like steps, small ones, human ones. As you drift closer to sleep, you understand a third truth of the night. The first real shift in prosperity often happens long before the numbers change. It happens when fear stops being the only voice you trust. You haven't moved much, but something inside you has rearranged itself quietly, like furniture shifted in the dark by someone who knows the room well. Fear hasn't vanished. It's still present, still capable of tapping you on the shoulder. But it no longer feels like the authority in the house. It feels more like a worried guest who's been offered tea and asked to lower their voice. Your attention drifts now, not outward, but inward, toward the way you notice things. Earlier in life, you were probably told that success came from effort, intelligence, or timing. Rarely did anyone mention attention. Yet here you are, realizing that where your attention rests changes the entire emotional landscape of money. When you glare at your finances, everything tightens. When you observe them gently, something opens. There's a true story that illustrates this with almost boring simplicity. A small business owner once went through a season where every invoice felt personal. Late payments triggered spirals of resentment and fear. On a therapist's suggestion, one he initially laughed at, he began a nightly ritual of neutral observation. He would sit, look at his accounts, and describe them as if he were a scientist studying weather. This amount is delayed. This expense occurred. No adjectives. No conclusions. Over months, his stress levels dropped. He followed up more consistently. Clients responded. His revenue stabilized. He later admitted the biggest shift was learning how to look without flinching. Here's a little-known fact that rarely shows up in motivational content. Attention is metabolically expensive. Your brain uses significant energy to maintain focus, especially on emotionally charged topics like money. When attention is hijacked by fear, your cognitive resources drain faster. This is why financial stress feels exhausting even when nothing changes. When you soften attention, by whispering, joking, or neutrally observing, you conserve mental energy. That energy becomes available for problem solving, creativity, and rest. Historians still debate whether ancient mindfulness practices emerged primarily as spiritual pursuits or as pragmatic tools for managing scarcity and uncertainty. Some scholars suggest meditation was less about enlightenment and more about emotional regulation in unpredictable economies. Others argue spirituality came first, practicality second. As you lie here, eyes heavy, the distinction feels less important. Either way, the practice works because it trained attention. You notice your own attention now. It drifts easily. It no longer snaps back to worry the moment it wanders. That's new. Fear thrives on vigilance. Calm allows wandering. And wandering, surprisingly, is where insights often hide. There's a soft humor in realizing how often you've been staring at the same financial facts without actually seeing them. You've been reading numbers through a filter of dread. Like wearing sunglasses indoors and complaining the room is dark. Tonight, you've taken them off. Everything looks the same, and completely different. That's joke number 1, nothing changed. And yet everything did. Another true account floats in. This one tied to health as much as money. A woman recovering from chronic anxiety noticed that her financial decisions improved only after her panic attacks lessened. She hadn't changed her income. She changed her attention. She stopped scanning for threats and started scanning for options. Her doctor later remarked that reduced cortisol levels often improve decision-making. Money followed calm. Again, there's an interesting, often overlooked idea in cognitive science. Attention doesn't just select information, it amplifies it. Whatever you focus on grows louder in your internal world. If you attend to lack, lack feels enormous. If you attend to capability, even quietly, capability becomes more accessible. You're not summoning abundance, you're adjusting volume knobs. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This is another cue for your mind. Attention is sunscreen. It protects you from getting burned by the same thoughts over and over. When fear starts narrating again, you can remember this feeling of neutral observation, this gentler gaze. You don't force sleep, you allow it. Attention loosens its grip, and thoughts become slower, softer, less linear. That's okay. This is where the nervous system repairs itself. This is where tomorrow quietly prepares. As this section of the night settles, you understand another truth. Prosperity doesn't always begin with action. Sometimes it begins with learning how to look without fear, how to let attention rest instead of hunt. You're not fully asleep, but you're no longer fully awake either. This is the soft middle state where ideas don't demand effort. They arrive the way smells do. Gently, without explanation. Somewhere in this space, the idea of a loop begins to make sense, not as a diagram or a concept, but as a feeling you recognize in your own body. You think about how fear used to loop. One anxious thought triggered another, which triggered a third, until the night felt crowded and loud. That was a loop too. Just not a kind one. Now, something different is forming. Whispering softened fear. Humor loosened rigidity. Gentle attention conserved energy. Each step fed the next. You didn't force it. You didn't plan it. It happened because you stopped interrupting yourself with panic. There's a true story that fits here like a puzzle piece. A retired teacher once found herself overwhelmed after unexpected medical bills. Her income was fixed. Her options felt limited. Instead of fighting the fear head-on, she created a small nightly ritual. She would sit with a cup of tea and name 3 things money had done for her that day. No matter how small. Paid for warmth. Paid for medicine. Paid for this tea. She whispered them, almost like secrets. Over time, her fear softened. She began budgeting calmly. She discovered assistance programs she'd avoided out of pride. Her situation didn't resolve overnight, but the steady calm created momentum. The loop closed gently, again and again. Here's a little-known fact tucked away in behavioral economics. Gratitude practices can increase patience and reduce impulsive decision-making. When people feel less threatened, they delay gratification more easily. That delay often leads to better financial outcomes. It's not magic, it's regulation. Calm minds choose differently than frightened ones. Historians still debate whether ritual repetition in ancient cultures served primarily to appease gods or to stabilize human behavior during uncertainty. Some argue the gods were central. Others believe the human nervous system was the real beneficiary. You smile slightly at the thought that both might be true. After all, whether you call it cosmic energy or conditioned calm, the result feels the same in your chest. You notice how the idea of money no longer feels sharp. It feels rounder, softer, less accusatory. That's joke number 1 for this section. Money hasn't changed shape, but your relationship to it has become more flexible, like switching from brittle glass to rubber. The prosperity loop doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or affirmations shouted at the mirror. It's quiet, it's repetitive, it's almost boring, and that's why it works. Fear thrives on drama, calm thrives on routine. Another true account drifts in. This one from someone who once lived paycheck to paycheck for years. He said the turning point wasn't a promotion. It was a habit. Every night, he thanked money for showing up at all. Even imperfectly. He stopped seeing it as a scorecard and started seeing it as a tool. Over time, he took calculated risks instead of desperate ones. His income grew gradually. He later laughed and said the biggest miracle was that he stopped sabotaging himself. There's a subtle, often overlooked insight here. Loops don't require belief, they require consistency. You don't need to be convinced this will work forever. You only need to repeat the gentler behavior long enough for it to become familiar. Familiarity breeds safety. Safety breeds clarity. Clarity breeds better choices. Loop. You feel your body responding to this idea. Your breathing slows further. Your thoughts stretch out, like cats in warm sunlight. You're not trying to remember anything. You're letting it settle. Remember that alligator. Remember to use sunscreen. This loop can become one of your cues. Whisper, soften, observe, repeat, not as a rule, as an option. You realize something quietly important. Fear once felt urgent because it was feeding itself. Calm now feels sustainable because it does the same. The loop you're building doesn't demand constant attention. It supports you even when you're tired. As sleep edges closer, you understand another truth of the night. Prosperity isn't always about adding more. Sometimes it's about removing the friction that kept you stuck in the same anxious cycle. You don't notice the exact moment your thoughts slow enough to feel spacious. But you sense it now, like stepping into a room where echoes fade quickly. The loop you've been circling, whisper, soften, observe, keeps turning on its own, without effort. In this quiet, a broader question drifts in, one that has followed humans for a very long time, trailing through temples, marketplaces, and bedrooms lit by nothing but worry. What actually changes a life? Belief or behavior? Historians still debate whether belief or behavior mattered more when people escaped hardship. Some insist belief came first, like a spark. Others argue behavior did the heavy lifting. One practical step at a time. Lying here now, you realize the debate might be misleading. Belief and behavior are not rivals. They're dance partners. Belief sets the tone. Behavior keeps the rhythm. And fear, when it leads, steps on toes. There's a true story that illustrates this without taking sides. A man once lost his job during an economic downturn. He believed in nothing spiritual, nothing cosmic. What he believed in was routine. Every evening, he spoke calmly about his finances out loud, not affirmations, not prayers, just steady narration. This is where I am. This is what I'll try tomorrow. He didn't believe words had power. He believed clarity did. Months later, he found work again. When asked what helped most, he said, talking without panicking. Belief in calm behavior. Perhaps, but not belief in miracles. Here's a little-known fact from cognitive psychology. When people articulate plans verbally, even softly, their follow-through improves. Speaking organizes thought. Whispering reduces threat perception. Combine the two, and you get clarity without alarm. You're not commanding the universe. You're cooperating with your own brain. You notice how this reframes the law of attraction into something less mystical and more humane. It's not about wishing harder. It's about reducing internal noise so signals become audible. When fear dominates, you miss information. When calm returns, you notice patterns, opportunities, timing, attraction. In this sense, might be attention refined by safety. There's a gentle joke here that makes you smile. Maybe the universe isn't responding to your affirmations at all. It's just relieved you finally stopped yelling. And like any shy guest, it only shows up when the room feels calm enough. Another true account slides into view. A woman facing foreclosure once said the turning point came when she stopped catastrophizing and started documenting. She whispered her options into a notebook at night, one line at a time. No drama, no conclusions. Within weeks, she'd contacted resources she hadn't known existed. Historians might argue about belief versus behavior, but she knew one thing for certain: fear had been blocking her hearing. You sense sleep pulling gently now, like a tide that doesn't rush. Your body understands this rhythm. Your mind likes it too. There's no demand to resolve the debate tonight. You don't need an answer carved in stone. You only need to feel the relief of not having to choose sides. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This debate can be another cue. When you catch yourself wondering whether you're believing correctly, you can smile and return to behavior. Whisper. Breathe. Observe. Belief often follows later, quietly, once behavior proves safe. You let the question rest. In rest, it softens, and in that softness, you understand another truth of the night. Prosperity doesn't require certainty. It only requires enough calm to let the next sensible step reveal itself. You drift a little deeper now, into that hour where the body feels heavier and the mind feels kinder. Thoughts don't line up anymore, they stretch and blur, overlapping like soft shadows. Money, health, calm, once separate worries, start to feel strangely connected, as if they've been sharing the same tight knot all along. You notice how stress used to live in your body before it ever showed up in your bank balance. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a stomach that never quite trusted the future. Fear wore many disguises, but it always knocked on the same door: your nervous system. Tonight, that door is closed, not locked, just gently shut. There's a true story that belongs here, where health and money meet in the middle. A man in his early 50s once faced both chronic back pain and mounting bills. He chased solutions aggressively, new treatments, side hustles, endless research, but everything felt uphill. Eventually, on a doctor's advice, he focused first on reducing stress. He changed nothing about his income. He changed his evenings. He spoke calmly about money before bed, then let it go. Within months, his pain lessened. With less pain came better sleep. With better sleep came clearer thinking. He noticed work opportunities he'd ignored. His income improved, slowly but steadily. He later said the strangest part was realizing money followed health, not the other way around. Here's a little-known fact that rarely appears in financial advice columns. Prolonged stress can impair glucose regulation and immune response. In simple terms, fear makes the body sick more easily. And when the body is sick, decision-making suffers. This creates a quiet trap where financial stress worsens health, and declining health worsens finances. Breaking the loop doesn't start with spreadsheets. It starts with calm. Historians still debate whether ancient healing rituals were primarily medical or psychological. Some argue they had physiological effects through herbs and rest. Others believe the belief itself reduced stress enough to allow healing. As you lie here now, breathing evenly, the debate feels academic. You can feel the truth in your own body. Calm heals first. Outcomes follow. You smile faintly at the idea that you once tried to solve everything while exhausted and tense. That's joke number 1 for this section. It's like trying to fix a watch while wearing boxing gloves. No wonder nothing worked. Another true account drifts in. Softer than the last, a woman dealing with anxiety and debt once committed to one rule: no financial decisions after 9 p.m. instead. She whispered reassurance to herself and her wallet, then slept. Over time, her anxiety eased. Her health improved. She made better decisions in daylight. Her finances stabilized. She didn't manifest money. She stopped manifesting panic. You feel how your own body responds to this idea. There's relief in not having to be productive at night. Night is for repair, not strategy. Fear hates that rule. Of course. Fear wants to work overtime. Calm clocks out. There's an interesting, often overlooked connection here. Sleep quality strongly predicts impulse control. Better sleep leads to fewer impulsive purchases, fewer avoidance behaviors, and more consistent follow-through. That's not mystical, it's biological. When you protect your rest, you protect your future choices. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This is another cue. When health feels shaky or money feels tight, the instinct is to push harder. Tonight teaches you the opposite. Sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is rest. You notice how your breathing has become slow and deep, almost automatic. Your body trusts this moment. It doesn't feel hunted. It doesn't feel judged. It feels allowed. As this part of the night settles, you understand another truth. Healing and prosperity often grow from the same soil. When you tend calm, both roots strengthen together. You're so close to sleep now that thoughts arrive with rounded edges. No longer sharp enough to cut. The room feels smaller in a comforting way. Like a nest built from familiar sounds and slow breathing. Somewhere between waking and dreaming. An idea surfaces that feels oddly personal. Your wallet is not just an object. It's a mirror, not of your worth, not of your future, but of your current emotional weather. You've treated it like a report card for years. Tonight, it feels more like a barometer. When storms of fear pass through you, it looks bleak. When calm settles, it looks neutral, not better, just clearer. And clarity, your learning, is underrated. There's a true story that illustrates this idea without drama. A woman who worked in retail once noticed that her wallet always felt chaotic, receipts stuffed everywhere, cards misplaced, coins rattling loosely. Her finances mirrored that chaos. On a whim, she began tidying her wallet every night. Slowly, without judgment. As she did, she spoke gently about money, naming each item without commentary. Over months, her finances didn't magically improve, but her relationship to them did. She tracked expenses more easily. She planned without dread. Eventually, her income rose when she felt confident enough to ask for a promotion. She later said the wallet changed first. Then everything else followed. Here's a little-known fact tucked into behavioral psychology. People are more likely to engage responsibly with resources they feel emotionally connected to. When something feels hostile or shame-laden, avoidance increases. When it feels familiar and safe, engagement improves. Treating your wallet kindly isn't superstition. It's strategy disguised as tenderness. Historians still debate whether symbolic objects in ancient cultures, talismans, vessels, tokens, held power because people believed in them or because they focused attention and care. Some argue symbolism was a shortcut to discipline. Others believe it shaped identity. As you lie here, half asleep, the distinction feels unnecessary. Objects become meaningful when they anchor behavior. That's enough. You imagine your wallet now, not as an enemy, but as a quiet witness. It has been with you through jobs you hated, meals you rushed, nights you worried too much. It didn't judge then. It doesn't judge now. That realization brings a small smile. Joke number 1 for this section. Your wallet has been the most loyal thing in your financial life. And you've barely said thank you. Another true account drifts in. This one from a man who once felt constant financial anxiety despite a decent income. His therapist suggested a strange exercise. Speak to money as if it reflected his inner state. When he was anxious, his spending spiked. When he was calm, it steadied. He began tracking mood alongside expenses. Patterns emerged. His wallet wasn't causing problems, it was reporting them. Once he listened, everything softened. You feel the truth of that now. Money hasn't been punishing you. It's been reflecting the tension you carried. Tonight, as your body relaxes, the reflection changes, not because numbers moved, but because you did. There's another small, often overlooked insight. Mirrors don't lie, but they also don't predict. Your wallet shows where you are, not where you're going. When fear narrates, it treats the mirror like a prophecy. When calm observes, it treats it like information. That shift alone reduces suffering. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This mirror idea can become another gentle cue. When finances feel heavy, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you can ask, "What am I feeling?" The answer often explains the numbers better than spreadsheets ever could. You notice how sleep is deepening now, pulling images into softer focus. The idea of the wallet as mirror fades into a feeling of acceptance. You don't need to fix the reflection tonight. You only need to let it be what it is. As this section settles into quiet, you understand another truth of the night. When you stop fighting the mirror, it becomes easier to adjust what it reflects. You're drifting now, not falling, just easing into a slower current where thoughts don't insist on being finished. In this softened state, something playful appears, a way of thinking that feels almost backward. Like walking down a familiar street in reverse and noticing details you always missed. This is where reverse thinking quietly enters. Not as a technique, but as a gentle curiosity. You've spent so much time asking, "How do I get rid of this worry?" Tonight, the question shifts on its own. What if worry isn't something to fight, but something to listen to differently? What if, instead of pushing it away, you thank it for trying to protect you, and then invite it to rest? There's a true story that fits perfectly here. A woman once overwhelmed by debt decided to try something counterintuitive. Instead of affirming abundance, she thanked scarcity for showing her where she felt unsafe. Each night, she whispered, "Thank you for pointing this out." It felt absurd, almost sarcastic, but something changed. The fear softened. She stopped resisting it. With resistance gone, her mind opened. She noticed practical solutions she'd previously ignored. Reverse thinking didn't erase the problem, it removed the struggle layered on top of it. Here's a little-known fact from psychology. Acceptance-based approaches often reduce anxiety more effectively than control-based ones. When you stop fighting a thought, its intensity often drops. The brain, relieved of conflict, recalibrates. Reverse thinking isn't pretending everything is fine. It's allowing things to be what they are without declaring war. Historians still debate whether ancient paradoxical teachings, koans, riddles, inversions, were meant to confuse or to liberate. Some believe confusion broke rigid thinking patterns. Others argue it redirected attention inward. Lying here now, you feel how a simple reversal loosens mental knots. When you stop demanding certainty, calm slips in. You try it gently. Instead of saying, "I can't afford this," you whisper, "Interesting that this feels scary." Instead of, "What if it gets worse?" you wonder, "What if this is temporary?" The questions don't demand answers. They create space. That space feels breathable. There's a soft joke here that makes you smile. Fear expects you to argue with it. When you don't, it doesn't know what to do. It's like a door-to-door salesman who prepared a whole speech and now finds you offering tea instead. Awkward, quiet, over quickly. Another true account drifts in. A man stuck in a financial deadlock once decided to reverse his nightly habit. Instead of listing what was wrong, he listed what was not currently a problem. Rent is paid. I ate today. I'm safe. His fear shrank, not because he ignored reality, but because he stopped exaggerating it. Within months, His decision-making improved. Opportunities appeared, not magically, but visibly. You feel how reverse thinking eases you toward sleep. It doesn't stimulate, it settles. It's compatible with rest. That's important. Anything meant to help at night must respect the body's need to power down. Remember that alligator. Remember to use sunscreen. Reverse thinking can be another cue. When a worry flares, instead of feeding it, flip it gently. Curiosity instead of panic. Observation instead of judgment. As this part of the night fades into deeper quiet, you understand another truth. Sometimes the fastest way out of a mental trap is to stop walking forward and simply turn around. You're so relaxed now that the idea of discovering something feels almost amusing. Discovery implies effort, movement, searching. But this section of the night doesn't ask you to search. It asks you to notice something that's been quietly present all along. Like a piece of furniture you stopped seeing because it never caused trouble. This is where an overlooked fact about prosperity slips into awareness, not with drama, but with a soft tap on the shoulder. You realize that abundance symbols have always been less about wealth itself and more about permission to feel safe. Coins kept in bowls, knots tied in red thread, small statues placed near doors. These weren't spreadsheets or business plans. They were reminders. Reminders that survival was possible. That tomorrow was allowed to exist. That calm was not irresponsible. There's a true story that fits neatly here. A woman who grew up during economic instability carried a constant, low-level fear about money even after she became financially secure. Her therapist suggested something simple: keep a small, ordinary object to represent continuity. She chose an old coin. Not valuable, just familiar. Every night, she held it and whispered a short acknowledgement of safety. Over time, her anxiety decreased. Her spending became intentional instead of reactive. The coin didn't attract money. It attracted steadiness. Here's a little-known fact from anthropology. Many prosperity symbols across cultures emerged during periods of scarcity. Not abundance. They weren't celebrations of excess, they were anchors during uncertainty. Their function wasn't to create wealth, but to regulate fear. That reframes a lot, doesn't it? The symbol wasn't a magnet. It was a stabilizer. Historians still debate whether these symbols worked because people believed in supernatural protection or because they provided psychological reassurance. Some argue belief was everything. Others suggest the calming effect alone improved judgment and cooperation. As you lie here now, breathing slow and even, you feel how reassurance changes the body first. The rest follows. You think about your own symbols, whether you've named them or not. A savings account you rarely touch. A note you keep meaning to throw away. A habit of checking balances before bed. Some of these symbols calm you. Some quietly stress you out. Tonight, you're learning that you're allowed to choose which ones you keep. There's a gentle humor in noticing how you once expected symbols to do all the work. That's joke number 1 for this section. You wanted a lucky charm to pay rent while you stayed anxious. Turns out, the charm's job was just to remind you to breathe. Another true account drifts in. This one almost forgettable in its simplicity. A man once placed a single bill, any amount, in a separate pocket and never spent it. Not as a savings strategy, but as a reminder that he wasn't at zero. During stressful periods, he touched it and relaxed. That relaxation changed how he negotiated, planned, and waited. His finances improved gradually. He said the bill didn't make him rich, it made him patient. You notice how patience feels in your body now. It feels like space. It feels like time slowing down. Fear hates patience because patience implies trust in process. But process is where real change lives. There's another overlooked insight worth resting with. Abundance symbols lose their effect when they become demands. When you expect them to perform, they add pressure. When you let them simply exist, they soothe. Tonight, you're letting go of demands. You're choosing quiet reminders over loud promises. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. Symbols can become sunscreen too. Not magical protection, but emotional protection. When fear flares, a simple object or habit can remind your nervous system that you've survived before. Sleep is deepening now. Your thoughts don't complete themselves. They don't need to. The idea settles on its own. Prosperity often begins with feeling not in danger. And feeling not in danger begins with small, overlooked cues of safety. As this section fades into the darker, softer part of the night, you understand another truth. The most powerful abundance tools are often the ones that ask nothing from you except presence. You're deep enough into the night now that time feels less strict. Minutes stretch, thoughts drift in, then drift out, leaving soft impressions behind. This is the hour when success stories sound different. They're no longer exciting or intimidating. They feel sleepy, almost tender, like someone telling you how they made it through a long winter without ever raising their voice. This is where a particular kind of success belongs, the kind that doesn't arrive with applause, but with relief. There's a true story that fits perfectly into this quiet. A young man once worked late nights at a small repair shop, barely covering rent, constantly worried he'd chosen the wrong path. Every evening, instead of scrolling or panicking, he sat on his bed and whispered a simple sentence: "Today was enough." He didn't say it because he believed it. He said it because he was tired. Over months, something subtle happened. He stopped overworking himself into mistakes. His repairs improved. Customers noticed. Word spread. His income increased slowly, steadily. Years later, when asked what changed, he said, "I stopped ending my days with fear." That detail matters. Success didn't begin with ambition. It began with how the day ended. Here's a little-known fact that rarely makes it into hustle culture. Memory consolidation, the way your brain organizes learning, happens during rest. The quality of your sleep affects how well you integrate skills, feedback, and patterns. When nights are filled with stress, learning stalls. When nights are calm, progress compounds quietly. Success, in many cases, is built while you're asleep. Historians still debate whether the great breakthroughs attributed to long hours and relentless effort were actually supported by periods of deep rest. Some argue progress came from sheer grind. Others believe recovery and reflection played a larger role than recorded. Listening here, half asleep, you sense the truth leaning toward balance. Nobody builds anything meaningful while exhausted forever. You smile faintly at the irony. For so long, you believed success required constant tension. That letting go meant falling behind. But tonight suggests the opposite. Tension blinds. Calm clarifies. There's a gentle joke hiding here. Fear acts like a terrible manager. It keeps you awake, yells vague instructions, and takes credit for anything that goes right. Calm, on the other hand, barely speaks, lets you sleep, and somehow things improve anyway. That's joke number one for this section. Another true account drifts in. Softer still. A woman once struggling with inconsistent freelance income decided to protect her evenings at all costs. No financial planning after dinner. No self-criticism at night. She whispered reassurances instead, then slept. Over time, her daytime focus sharpened. She priced her work more confidently. Clients responded. Stability followed. She later said her biggest professional upgrade was learning when to stop thinking. You feel how natural that sounds now. Night is not for fixing. Night is for closing loops gently. Fear hates unfinished business, but sleep needs it. When you trust that tomorrow exists, you allow tonight to end. There's another small, overlooked insight worth resting with. People who feel safe at night tend to make braver choices during the day. Safety doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You're less reactive, more intentional. Success grows from that precision. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. Ending the day kindly can become one of your cues. When you feel yourself spiraling at night, you can remember this section. Success doesn't demand your exhaustion as proof of effort. You notice how your body has fully accepted rest now. Breathing is deep, muscles are loose, thoughts arrive slower, quieter. Even the idea of money feels distant, like a task scheduled far in the future. There's one more light joke before this section fades. Success stories sound much less impressive when told at bedtime. And that's a good thing. It means they're human-sized. Achievable, not performances, just processes. As this part of the night settles, you understand another truth. Many turning points don't happen when you push harder. They happen when you finally allow the day to end without fear. You're moving through the night now the way a boat moves through dark water, slowly. With trust, letting the current do most of the work. Thoughts are no longer lined up like arguments. They arrive like questions that don't require answers. Somewhere in this softened space, another long-standing debate drifts past. Quieter than before, almost polite. Scholars still question whether prosperity rituals work through belief alone or through something subtler. Identity change. Do people improve their lives because they believe something new? Or because they begin to see themselves differently while doing the same small actions? The question hangs in the air, not demanding resolution. There's a true story that lives inside this uncertainty. A woman once stuck in a cycle of low-paying jobs tried countless methods to attract more money. None worked until something almost invisible shifted. She stopped seeing herself as someone who was bad with money. She didn't replace the belief with grand confidence. She replaced it with neutrality. "I'm learning," she whispered at night. That was all. Over time, she applied for roles she previously dismissed as not for people like me. She negotiated. She stayed calm during interviews. Her income grew, not because she believed in abundance, but because she stopped identifying as scarcity. Here's a little-known fact from social psychology. Identity labels strongly influence behavior, often more than explicit goals. When people see themselves as learners rather than failures, persistence increases dramatically. That persistence, over time, compounds. Prosperity may be less about believing you deserve money and more about allowing yourself to participate without fear. Historians still debate whether ritual repetition changed outcomes by shaping belief systems or by reshaping daily behavior patterns. Some argue belief rewrote destiny. Others suggest behavior quietly did the work while belief took the credit. Lying here, eyelids heavy, you sense how identity sits between the two. Belief influences identity. Identity influences behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Loop. You notice how this lands in your body. There's relief in not having to convince yourself of anything dramatic. You don't need to chant confidence into existence. You only need to stop telling yourself the same limiting story every night. Silence, it turns out, can be an upgrade. There's a soft joke tucked into this realization. For years, you may have been trying to manifest money while simultaneously manifesting self-doubt. It's like stepping on the gas and the brake at the same time. Then blaming the road. Tonight, you ease your foot off the brake. Another true account floats in, almost sleepy in its simplicity. A man once recovering from bankruptcy said his turning point came when he stopped introducing himself, internally, as someone who messed up. He replaced it with someone rebuilding. That single word changed how he approached everything. He learned. He waited. He didn't panic. Over time, his finances stabilized. Identity-led, Numbers followed. There's an overlooked insight here that feels comforting. You don't have to know who you will become to stop being who fear says you are. Letting go of a harsh identity is often easier than adopting a glowing one. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. Identity can be another gentle cue. When a familiar self-criticism surfaces, you can recognize it as an old label, not a fact. You don't need to argue with it. You can let it drift by like a late-night radio signal fading into static. You're very close to sleep now. Thoughts stretch out, lose their edges. The debate between belief and behavior no longer matters. What matters is how you feel right now. Safe enough to rest. Curious enough to change later. As this section settles into quiet, you understand another truth of the night. Prosperity often begins the moment you stop calling yourself by the wrong name. You're barely holding onto the edges of thought now. Sleep keeps tugging, not urgently, just patiently, like it knows you'll come when you're ready. In this softened state, something important becomes easier, not doing, not believing, but letting go of urgency, letting go of the sense that everything must be resolved immediately, or else something terrible will happen. You notice how urgency once felt like responsibility. If you didn't worry constantly, didn't push, didn't rehearse worst-case scenarios, you feared you were being careless. Tonight, that belief loosens. You see urgency for what it often is: fear wearing a productivity costume. There's a true story that belongs exactly here. A woman once buried under student loans described how urgency nearly ruined her. She tracked every cent obsessively, losing sleep, snapping at people, making rushed decisions that cost more in the long run. One night, completely burned out, she made a rule: no urgency after dark. She whispered to herself, "This can wait." At first, it felt irresponsible. Over time, it felt liberating. Her decisions became calmer. She consolidated loans. She chose steadier work. Her debt shrank, not because she acted faster, but because she stopped acting from panic. Here's a little-known fact from neuroscience. Urgency activates the brain's threat circuitry, reducing access to long-term planning centers. In simple terms, panic makes you short-sighted. Calm expands time. When you feel like you have time, you make better choices. Letting go of urgency isn't laziness. It's strategy. Historians still debate whether societies that emphasized patience over speed were more resilient during economic hardship. Some argue rapid action saved lives and resources. Others suggest patience prevented costly mistakes. As you drift here, neither side feels absolute. What feels true is this: urgency without clarity rarely helps. You feel how this lands in your body. There's a deep exhale, almost involuntary. Muscles soften further. The sense of being chased recedes. Nothing bad happens when you stop rushing, at least not tonight. That realization itself is calming. There's a gentle joke in noticing how urgency has been acting like a fire alarm that goes off every time you toast bread. Loud, stressful, and rarely accurate. Tonight, you unplug it. Another true account drifts in, almost dreamlike. A man rebuilding after business failure said the moment things changed was when he stopped demanding immediate results. He focused on consistency instead. One small task per day. No dramatic leaps. Years later, he described that phase as boring, but safe. His finances stabilized. His health improved. Boredom, it turned out, was fertile ground. You feel how compatible boredom is with sleep. Urgency keeps you awake. Patience tucks you in. There's another overlooked insight here. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means trusting sequence. You don't harvest the same day you plant. Fear forgets that. Calm remembers. Remember that alligator. Remember to use sunscreen. Letting go of urgency can be another cue. When you feel the rush rising, You can remember this heaviness in your limbs, this permission to pause. You're almost fully asleep now. Thoughts slow to the point of dissolving. The idea settles without words. Nothing important is lost by resting. Many things are lost by rushing. As this section fades into near dream, you understand another truth of the night. When you release urgency, life often meets you with steadier, kinder timing. You're hovering right on the edge now, where thoughts turn into feelings and feelings turn into something wordless. The night feels thick and gentle, like it's holding you in place so nothing urgent can reach you. In this stillness, something old and quiet appears, not belief in a dramatic sense, but faith in the ordinary kind of continuity. The kind that says, I've made it through days like this before. You remember how, during your hardest times, the future felt sealed shut. Not bad exactly, just inaccessible. Tonight, the future doesn't need to open. It only needs to exist. That's enough. There's a true story that belongs here. Wrapped in dusk, an elderly man once lost nearly everything during a prolonged illness. Savings dwindled. Work paused. What sustained him wasn't optimism or plans. It was a small ritual at sunset. Each evening, he sat by a window and whispered thanks, not for money, but for persistence. Still here, he would say. Over time, help arrived. Neighbors, programs, work adapted to his pace. He later said he never once believed things would be great. He only believed they would continue. And they did. Here's a little-known fact that rarely enters discussions about prosperity. Hope and faith are not the same. Hope looks forward. Faith stabilizes the present. Studies suggest that people grounded in present moment faith trust that this moment is survivable, experience less stress than those fixated on future outcomes. Faith doesn't demand predictions. It offers steadiness. Historians still debate whether faith-based endurance during hardship shaped economic recovery or simply softened the experience of waiting. Some argue faith kept communities intact until conditions improved. Others suggest it had no material impact at all. Lying here now, you realize both can be true. Even if faith didn't change circumstances directly, it changed how people endured them. Endurance, in turn, made change possible. You feel that endurance in your own body now. It feels like heaviness, not exhaustion, but grounding, like your weight is finally allowed to settle into the bed. Fear doesn't disappear, it just stops pacing. There's a quiet joke in recognizing how much energy you once spent demanding certainty. That's joke number one for this section. You wanted guarantees from a world that only offers patterns. Tonight, patterns are enough. Another true account drifts in. Barely formed. A woman once facing eviction described how she stopped begging the universe for rescue and started trusting small continuities, morning light. Her breath, the fact that she could still rest. That trust steadied her enough to take practical steps when opportunities appeared. She didn't feel lucky, she felt present. That presence mattered. You notice how faith, in this sense, doesn't require belief in anything external. It's not cosmic fireworks. It's the quiet confidence that this moment won't break you. And if this moment won't break you, perhaps the next one won't either. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. Faith can be another cue. When fear insists on certainty, faith answers with continuity. Still here, still breathing. You're almost fully asleep now. Thoughts dissolve before finishing themselves. Words stretch, then blur. The idea settles gently. You don't need to see the whole path to take the next calm step. As this section sinks into the dark, you understand another truth of the night. Faith at dusk isn't about believing everything will be fine. It's about trusting that you can rest without everything falling apart. You're no longer holding the night up with thought. The night is holding you. What remains now isn't an idea or a technique, but a feeling that has been quietly assembling itself across everything you've heard. A sense of closure without finality. Like a door gently pulled to, not locked. Like a sentence that ends softly, leaving space for breath. You can barely track where one thought ends and another begins. That's perfect. This is the state where loops complete themselves without effort. The whisper, the humor, the attention, the patience, they've all folded into one another, forming something steady enough to rest on. There's a final true story that fits here. Not because it's impressive, but because it's ordinary. A person once described reaching a point where money stopped being the loudest voice in their life. Not because they were wealthy, but because they were no longer afraid. They still budgeted, they still planned, but fear no longer narrated every choice. When asked how they did it, they said, "I stopped asking money to tell me who I was." That was it. Nothing mystical, nothing dramatic, just a boundary. Here's a little-known fact worth letting fade into sleep with you. Emotional closure doesn't require resolution. The brain can settle even when problems remain unsolved. As long as it feels safe enough to pause. That pause restores resources. Those resources fuel tomorrow. Closure, in this sense, is temporary, and that's okay. Historians still debate whether peace ever truly arrives or if it's always momentary. Some argue stability is an illusion. Others believe it's cyclical. Lying here now, you feel how peace doesn't need permanence to matter. It only needs to exist long enough for rest to happen. You notice there's nothing left to do tonight. That realization feels like relief spreading slowly through your limbs. Fear has nothing to argue with. Urgency has nowhere to stand. The loop you've built doesn't demand attention anymore. It supports you quietly, like a structure that remains even when you stop looking at it. There's one last, very gentle joke before sleep takes over. Money worries are terrible bedtime storytellers. They never know when to end. Tonight, you've taken the book from them and closed it yourself. Remember that alligator, remember to use sunscreen. This entire night can become a cue. When fear returns, as it will, you can remember how it felt to rest without solving everything. That memory alone can soften the next moment. Your breathing is slow now. Your body is heavy. Thoughts come and go without attachment. You don't need to carry anything forward consciously. The loop is already closed for tonight. And in this final quiet, you understand the last truth. There is only one storyteller, and tonight. It's no longer fear. The night is very quiet now. Not empty, just calm in a way that doesn't ask anything of you. Words are fewer. Spaces between breaths feel longer. You don't need to remember everything you heard. You don't need to hold on to any lesson. Whatever mattered has already settled where it needed to. You've spent this time not fixing, not chasing, not demanding. You've practiced something much rarer, allowing. Allowing yourself to whisper instead of shout. To smile instead of brace. To rest instead of rehearse tomorrow's worries. None of that required effort. It required permission. If your mind drifts back to money, or health, or unfinished problems, that's okay. Let them float by like distant lights on water. You don't have to follow them tonight. They'll still be there in the morning. Only you'll meet them with a steadier body and a quieter mind. Feel the weight of the bed beneath you. The gentle rhythm of your breathing. The fact that this moment is safe enough to fade into sleep. Nothing important is being missed. Nothing is falling apart because you rested. You are allowed to sleep without answers. You are allowed to pause the story. Tomorrow can wait. Now let the words thin out. Let the silence do the rest. End of script. Good night.